We are excited to have you here. And as you may be aware, this is part of WWF's series to encourage and support cities to be able to respond quickly and efficiently to the climate crisis. The content for this webinar is co-produced in collaboration with between the WWF Global Food Programme and the Global CD Programme. And I am Carina Borgström-Hansson, Senior Advisor to the WWF CDs Programme. And just to give you a glimpse of what this is about, it's an ambitious global initiative where we want cities to become transformation catalysts and implement integrated and inclusive plans in line with a 1.5 degree global maximum warming, and working with resilience and unlocking individual and collective climate actions. And we know to get there, cities will need to make clear and science-based plans and learn from each other's successes and adapt the most innovative solutions to their individual city circumstances. And WWF is working from many countries with this global program. And the key mechanism for us is the One Planet City Challenge. And this challenge aims to support your city in driving and developing more action in line with science. And as you may also be aware, we're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. And the City Challenge is the largest and longest running challenge of its kind. We've had more than 700 cities participating in it over the years. And in this year, we already have more than 280 cities signed up. We run this program in close collaboration with various city networks, including the Global Covenant of Mayors, C40, and ICLEI and CDP, whose reporting platform we are using for the challenge. I'm quite excited to see many cities in this call. And if there are any of you that haven't signed up yet for the City Challenge, let me also remind you of the overall benefits for taking part. So by participating, you get more public recognition for your climate efforts, both nationally and internationally, if you make it as a finalist. You will get strategic feedback on how you can align your climate targets to 1.5 and what actions you need to take to be able to cut emissions and also to adapt to climate change. You will finally also get a lot of support on citizen engagement to help you inspire citizens and raise their awareness about the climate action that you are taking and where their involvement will be essential. If there are any newcoming cities or any cities that already have signed up, please let us know as well. You can mention in the chat if you are new or if you are already reporting for this round of the City Challenge. And for all of you, of course, from the One Planet City Challenge team, we want to remind you that actually on this Friday is the deadline for reporting to the CDP and ICLEI Unified Reporting Platform. So the data must be submitted as public in order for you to be able to participate. And once the data is reported, you can expect then feedback coming from WWF. You'll receive reports from us, and we'll also run a webinar on the 24th of February, where we help you interpret those reports and also prepare how you can present it to your stakeholders and of course decision makers. Well, that was on the One Planet City Challenge, so the main mechanisms for WWF's engagement with you, and this webinar series is part of the offer to cities that are participating. And now we'll jump straight into the topic of today, our food system, and why we need to do something about it. So the issue with the food system today is that it accounts for more than a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions and up as much as 70% of the current biodiversity loss. We have 3 billion people that can't afford a healthy diet. We have 2 billion people that are overweight or obese, and 1.1 billion tons per year of edible food is wasted in upstream production, harvest, and the post-harvest stages. This means that we lose an amount of water each year equivalent to 304 million Olympic swimming pools, and we waste actually land with the size of the entire subcontinent of India. So we have a lot of waste in the system, and that also includes nutrient waste. Only 2% of the nutrients in the food is recycled via, for example, composting. So why do cities need to act here? Well, many cities have started to look at the consumption-based emissions, and we know that food is the largest single contributor to the city's consumption-based emissions, or the Scope 3 emissions. We know that in the urban centers globally, there is a wastage of about 500 million tons of food each year. We also know, due to urbanization, that up to 80% of the world's food consumption will happen in cities by 2050. Now, the cities are not only the places where the problems play out, they are the places where we can also find the solutions, because the cities, they have a unique sphere of governance which allows them to pilot and adapt cutting-edge solutions. And at the same time, these solutions can reach a big number of people, especially if we combine it. If we combine the efforts of cities around the world. And we see leadership from cities here, and we will soon also hear examples from a leading city. Let's also remember, when you start to work on the food system in the city, you also create co-benefits when it comes to other areas where there are problems and challenges, such as water, energy, biodiversity loss, transportation issues, waste issues, economic equity, justice, and of course, cultural benefits can also be achieved by going more deeply into sustainable food. And we all know, post or in the pandemic, how important it is to create resilient food systems and sustainable food supply chains to avoid disruption. Now, if you want to take action on food, it is critical to understand that each city is unique. So you need a systems approach. That means you identify what's already in your city, what action is needed in how you can co-create action in your city. When we talk about a food systems approach, it means that you will consider the food system in its totality. So you include all the elements, all the relationships, and the effects of the food system in your analysis and in your work. There are a lot of tools and frameworks that can assist you if you want to take action on your food system. And first, the different components of the food system need to be understood. And that includes the production, the processing, the logistics, which is of course very relevant in the cities, the retail and the restaurants component, and of course the consumption. And all these different steps will have waste and inputs. If you want to understand your food system, there are guides, more or less extensive. I want to flag that WWF has a food system thinking guide, which is coming soon, and the illustration on the right side comes from the draft of this guide. but there are also more extensive frameworks that you can already use today from FAO or from eClay and also UNEP. The main steps when you start to engage with your food system is to map the food system actors and make sure to remember to include also NGOs and businesses and grassroots organizations that have an interest in food. You need to also evaluate and assess the existing policies and the current investments that are directed at your food system in order to understand where you can do impactful actions. And most importantly, you also need to have data and understand what the current engagement mechanisms are, where you can set targets and develop policy. Now, if you want to join or share reflections in the chat, you're very welcome to share with us, for example, the largest challenges you see when you're working with food. So please feel free to use the chat during this call, because it's very interesting to see we are coming from different contexts and the challenges may look different in different places. WWF, through our Global Food Program, has invested in a lot of research and the collaborative assessments of the food system. And one of the conclusions, which is illustrated here to the right, coming from the report called Bending the Curve, one of the conclusions is that if we could enable access to more healthy, sustainable, and primarily plant-based food, that would be the most impactful action we could take, both to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to boost and improve global health. We have a material called the Planet-Based Diets. It's a resource that you can find online with definition of what a plant-based diet is, but just as a shorthand, it's a matter of increasing the share of locally specific sustainable ingredients and of course more plants. And again, this would be the largest opportunity for reducing it for your consumption. And this is of course because the consumption of animal-based food represents 75% of global food emissions against only 25% coming from the consumption of plant-based food. So please consult our Planet-Based Diets resource to find more info and support to work with diets. The valuable thing about that resource is that it has context-specific advice adapted to different countries, because of course it looks very different in terms of what alternatives there are and the current share of animal versus plant products in your national diet. It's good to know that also when you discuss eating more plant-based or more flexitarian food, that there is a very strong health argument or health motive on average. So there's been a lot of research, and there is a report by the Eat Lancet Commission where they found that 11 million people could actually be saved per year by a shift towards a more healthy flexitarian diet. And when you work on shifting diets, the procurement to the public institutions, schools, prisons, hospitals, city-sponsored events, those procurement actions would then include adapting the volume of meat served, like usually reducing it, and to promote more sustainable produce, where you consider more organic, more local produce as part of a bigger share in your procurement. It's also an opportunity with the public institutions to include and design learning activities around the meal, and especially so in schools. And you may have heard of the so-called whole school food approach. And this is something we can also support from WWF side, and it will also be mentioned in the upcoming education-focused webinar. There is a lot of research done on shifting diets, but also on the role of reducing food loss and waste. So whereas shifting diets is the most impactful action area to reduce greenhouse gas losses, the shifting or the reducing of food loss and waste is the second biggest impact area. And reducing food loss and waste can be done primarily through prevention of waste. And that requires education, both of procurers so that they pay attention to not over purchasing, and of course education of the public. And again, the schools are great places to increase awareness about unnecessary waste of food at the consumption stage, just by adapting how much food you load on your plate, for example. A city can also do a lot to reduce food loss and waste by supporting donation. So you can, for example, expand on policies which makes it easier to donate food. That would include more liability protections and education on food and safety. You can have taxes that support food donations. You can enter public-private partnerships to enable more food rescue initiatives and voluntary commitments, and also build an infrastructure that enable rescue. For example, public fridges, places where people can actually leave remaining food for use of others. Thirdly, in order to capture nutrient loss, your city can work more with composting and also with purchasing products from composting. Last but not least, to work on food waste or on any policy action, it's important that you, in order to manage, you also need to measure. So starting to develop metrics on food loss is very important, and then you can set targets and you can report and you can follow up on those targets. I realized that in the previous slide, I also had some general points on behavior change, which actually cuts across both food loss and waste behavior and diet behavior. And just to talk through some of the principles of behavior change, we are actually working on a behavior change guide, which will be launched in the first quarter of next year. And what we will be picking up on there is also very recent but strongly founded research on what drives behavior change. And here there are a couple of principles. One of them is, of course, if you don't have information, you won't be changing behavior. So providing information about what the desired behavior is and why it matters and how to do it is key. And here I also want to shout out, because our colleagues, the WWF Philippines office is actually working with interesting education materials for, in particular, young people to make sustainable food choices through something called the Sustainable Diner program. So colleagues in the Philippines might want to check that out. Another entry point for behavior change, which is of course very important, is social influence. So this means that you, in order to change behavior, often need to feel that the new behavior is the perceived norm. And you can use this group dynamic and this wanting to belong to a group strategically to drive shifts in behavior. And remember, there are lots of professional organizations, including companies, of course, who know exactly how to do this. So partnering with companies or influencers using social media to encourage shifting behavior towards more sustainable diets, for example, or towards not throwing away food. Another entry point is emotional appeals. Like if you can create emotions at the point of making decisions which relate to joy or pride, being proud that your city is a city where people eat sustainably or don't waste food or share food. That's also an entry that, according to research, makes the shift more easy for people. And this is something, again, like in your communications or in collaborative communication about sustainable food or sustainable food behavior, you can use pictures and like local connection to build this pride in you belonging to a city, for example, where you don't waste food. Let's not forget also that material incentives are, of course, real. Like if you increase or decrease the real or perceived cost or time or effort with a certain choice of food or with a certain behavior, like throwing away food, if there's a perception that it's less costly in time or effort to do the right thing, of course, this will also drive the shift towards the more sustainable alternative. And in the very context where decisions are made in a restaurant, for example, you can also do changes that actually makes it difficult to choose the wrong thing, or where you make the better option the default option. For example, you could encourage changing menu options at the city workplaces to offer a veggie meal as the default, with the option to add in meat, but just by having the veggie meal as the default, it's more likely that people will choose that. And then, of course, there are rules and regulations that you can use. And last but not least, let's also remember part of the shift to sustainable food system is a matter of giving people access to the right, the more sustainable choice. And this a city can support by increasing the linkages between producers and consumers through local procurement and increasing the accessibility of farmers markets and production co-ops. You can support more urban agriculture by allocating municipal land for local agriculture. You can create nutritional support programs that incentivize consumption of fresh fruit and veggies. And in the overall design of the city, you can provide zoning laws, ordinances, and advertising restrictions to make it easier to find sustainable food or to expose citizens to more healthy choices. Let me now skip to the last slide of my intervention and just go through some main findings also when it comes to food interventions or interventions in the more soft area of behavior change. These are some principles for interventions that are successful. First, the interventions need to be inclusive, and that means they need to really include people across different sectors, include people of different roles, so multi-stakeholders roles is important. One mechanism that is very promising is so-called food policy councils, where you can convene representatives of the food system, from the city agencies to the farmers and to youth and indigenous people, retailers. A strategy that works and is inclusive will also consider power imbalances between stakeholders and enable the weaker actors in this context to take full part in the conversations. Successful interventions also need to connect with power to make decisions. So if you have a stakeholder participation mechanism or a food policy advisor, you also need to make sure that the necessary funding and power is given to these actors to influence, for example, the land use planning, the budget allocation, and the overall food policy development. An important aspect is also to balance the urban and the rural interest in the transformation of the food system. Very important to include the rural stakeholders in the policy conversations. And of course, if you don't integrate the food policy work in the overall climate action planning frameworks, you will also have a challenge. So really pulling everything together is key. And well, here I've summed up some findings. There is so much more. And I want to encourage you to thank you, Gara, for putting in the chat the urban food system brief that we've developed with, it's called Policy Plates and Planet. So please check if you want to revisit these recommendations and kind of recipes for food system interventions. So please look at that brief. Yeah, I won't talk more now about the theory of shifting food systems, because I'm very happy that we have with us today an expert in the practice of doing this. We have a representative here from Copenhagen who has worked many years on transforming the food system. So with this, I would like to welcome Anya, who is a senior advisor in the field of food policy in the city of Copenhagen, to share experience from Copenhagen and inspiration, I'm sure. So Anya, you will have 15 minutes to share your experience, and then we'll have opportunities also to ask you questions and have some general discussion at the end. Over to you, Anya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. If there are weird sounds coming from here, it's because we're working from home now. We have new restrictions in Copenhagen, and I have a couple of dogs sleeping at my feet, so they're snoring. So that might be the weird sounds that you will be hearing. I'm really happy to be speaking to you today. I want to really quickly run you through the new initiatives that we have in Copenhagen and what we're building on top of, to explain what we're trying to do when it comes to transitioning our public diets towards a more plant-based and more climate-friendly way of cooking and of eating. So maybe I can have my first slides. I'm not sure if I'm able to shift them. Yeah, so we can have the next one. So the facts in Copenhagen is that we are serving around 70,000 meals per day, around 1,000 units, kitchen units that are within the city, within the municipality, in the different departments. Our organization in Copenhagen is that all of the kitchens belong to the city. We don't have external caterers, and the kitchen staff are employed locally. So they're part of the school, part of the elderly care home, part of the social institution, so that differs from many other places where there are external caterers who come in and cook the food. We have currently around 84% organic in our public procurement. That's the latest numbers that we have from 2019. Our goal for the past 20 years has been to reach 90% organic in our public procurement. That has been a very long journey because it's the kitchens in Copenhagen have not been allowed to have extra budgets for the organic conversion, so they've been asked to do it within the existing budget, and that means shifting around very much on how they cook and how they plan their menus. So they've already for 20 years been working on having less meat, more seasonal food, less food waste, and more cooking from scratch. So that's the sort of foundation that we're building on top in Copenhagen. Next slide, please. So in the past 20 years, in the organic conversion that we've been working on, we've had all these different aspects of public food that you have to balance. You have to make sure that obviously there are economical restraints, there are social aspects of meals, the quality of life of the citizen, nutritional demands, so on. But all of that and the sustainability of the food doesn't really matter if the food is not appealing and is not being eaten by the citizens. So that's also the culinary skills and the upskilling of our kitchen staff has also been the main sort of tool that we've been using in this sense, that we've been most of our resources in this program has gone towards training and inspiring and upskilling our kitchen staff throughout the years, which is an ongoing process. Next slide, please. So the new aspect that we're trying to bring into our food strategy is to see how we can use all of these tools and work within the framework that we already have towards including climate mitigation in our public food. And next slide. I think the next issue that we will be talking about, which fits very nicely with Carina's comments also from earlier, is that we will probably try to look at the biodiversity crisis and how our public procurement can what we can do to sort of to add demands or to add strategies that can sort of address also that crisis. Next slide, please. So when we look at the climate emissions from Copenhagen, this is the charts are from our baseline that the World Resource Institute helped us calculate which is based on the total consumption of the public food in Copenhagen in 2018. So on the one side, you have the tonnage, where the side with the really small red sliver is the actual sort of proportionality when it comes to the tons of food. But on the other side, you have the proportionality of the footprint of that food. So you can see that the small amount of ruminant meats really takes up a big part of the footprint, and vice versa. You can see that a really large amount of fruits and vegetables have a really small footprint. So obviously, when we're talking about this, I think this is child's knowledge for most people by now. But I think ruminant meats and meats in general is something that we really have to look at. Of course, that's not the total of the climate challenge for public food, but it looms very large. So this is sort of the starting point that we have. Next slide, please. So in 2019, our city government developed a new food strategy that builds on top of the existing one that was aimed more towards just converting the kitchens towards more organic food. And if you can take the next slide. Yeah. So just to sort of sum up the sustainability goals that are in our food strategy, we have a lot of other goals also, but it specifies that we should aim to lower our emissions by 25% by 2025. We are also developing an action plan and a baseline when it comes to reducing food waste in public kitchens. We're still trying to figure out a method on how to sort of monitor that. So when that's done, we will have some reduction goals also in that area. It's been specified earlier. The percentage of or the goal of 90% organic was a general goal for all of the city. So it is more like a cross section. Now it's been specified that each individual kitchen needs to reach 90% organic. So that's actually sort of a raising of the bar when it comes to the individual kitchen. And also we're working in the C40 framework and so on, other places to try to work on the broader food system. Next slide, please. So more specifically, what we're trying to do to prepare our kitchens when it comes to, and our kitchen staff on this new journey on how to become more climate friendly. We've been very inspired by the sort of the method and the take that we've seen from the Lancet Commission. So I remember when this work came out in 2019, just the fact that there were such specific measurements. So I clearly remember the 14 grams of beef, lamb, and pork per person per day, which is a very sort of, instead of speaking all the time about less meat and more vegetables, it's very sort of clarifying to have some actual specific numbers to work from. So that's sort of what we've attempted to do in the city of Copenhagen, inspired by this Eat Lancet plate. Next slide, please. So we've developed guidelines for our kitchens that are specified to all the different types of citizens that we have. So we have really small children, we have kindergarten age children, we have school children, we have elderly. We also have a portion of our elderly who have reduced appetites and are sort of weak, and many of them are sick. We have adults, we have youth, and everything in between. So we have developed guidelines that aim to show our kitchens how they can balance nutrition, climate demands, and general sustainability goals. So how should a specific diet look if we take all those different things into account? Next slide, please. So when we look at the guidelines that we've developed, these are in Danish. I have only translated one of the slides, but next slide, please. You can see that, you can't see because it is in Danish, but we're focusing on mostly communicating to our kitchens what do they need to serve more of, and what they need to focus to make sure that there's more of in the meals are vegetables, and they need to make sure that the vegetables are of varied colors. They have to make sure that at least 1/3 of the vegetables are of the dark green variety, so it can't only be carrots and tomatoes. They have to serve pulses often, and they have to use nuts and seeds more than they do today, and also often. If you can take next slide. And also, when it comes to communicating, we're trying to say what do they need to use less of, and that is obviously meats and dairy and eggs. So they have specifications on how often they're supposed to use those in the diet or in the planning of the weekly meals, to make sure that they don't use more than they're supposed to. Next slide. So I've translated one of the guidelines for kindergartens. So it would be, the guideline would be to use meat sparingly, and that means once a week. So serve meat in a main course at most once a week. And if it's beef, veal, or lamb, it's only once a month. So the other weeks it would have to be poultry or fish or something else. And to serve beans and lentils more often would be 1 or 2 times a week. And this is for us, from the way that we've been working earlier, where we've been advising the kitchens and teaching them and training them. This is so much more specific than we've used it before. So we've been able to say, do more of this and do less of this. And now we are actually able to be much more specific. Next slide, please. So yeah, and next slide. So this means, for instance, sure it's too small, the text is too small to read, but the recommendations are very specific. So for instance, it says 30 to 40 grams of uncooked lentils or beans per child per week. And the 30% is for a smaller child, the 40% is for a larger child. And in our work with the kitchens and our education programs, it's very important that we have these very specific measurements that we can advise them. Then we can pull the data from their procurement, and we can figure out how far they are from reaching their targets. Do they need to double the amounts? How should they be able to work with a much more specific sort of recommendation than we've had before? Next slide. We also have very specific recommendations when it comes to vegetables and to nuts and seeds, and this will be especially the nuts and seeds part will be a very it's a big challenge, because we're not used to incorporating that amount of seeds and nuts in our diet. So we will need to think very creatively to figure out how to help the kitchens to do this. Next slide. So, for instance, we're helping the kitchens with developing meal plans for the week, where they can see not that they all should be using them all the time, but they can see how they should incorporate if all of the more of if all the vegetables and pulses and nuts and seeds are to be incorporated into only the main meal of the day, the lunch, then for kindergarten, for instance, then that would be very demanding. Otherwise, if they can spread it out on all the different meals, the snack meals, the breakfasts, and so on. So next slide. So we're trying to teach them how to incorporate all these different food groups into many different types of meals, so that it doesn't become so very intense in just having the one meal where they have to reach all the targets at once. So for us, this is a very great tool that we have, and we're very lucky because we've been able to get our national technical university in Denmark to help us develop the tools. And they're also the ones who are developing our national nutritional guidelines. So we feel like we're having a lot of, they're lending us a lot of their credibility in sense that many of our dietary staff and so on, people who are very concerned with nutrition and who would be scared that a climate transition would sort of somehow jeopardize the nutritional status for some of our weaker citizens, they can feel assured that we really have some good expertise in figuring out how to balance all these different parameters that we need to incorporate in a public food. Next slide, please. So we're also supporting our kitchens with a website, a database of 750 climate-friendly recipes, and they're tailored to children, youth, and adults, or elderly. So they're tailored both in nutritional content, but also in the types of food that different types of our citizens like to eat and have a tradition for eating. So next slide. And the website is tailored so that you can sort it by season. So you have the seasonal ingredients. You can figure out by target group, who am I cooking for, what type of meal is this, a snack meal, is this a dinner, is it a lunch, is it packed food that I need to bring on an excursion. So you can use it to figure out how to be inspired for cooking this more climate friendly meal in the future. Next slide. Yeah. So the sort of, we're building on top of the methods that we've been using for the past 20 years. And the reason we have a sort of cautiously optimistic view on whether we'll be able to reach our climate targets of reducing 25% across all of these 1,000 kitchens in Copenhagen is that we know that we've been able to do a transition process earlier when it comes to organic food, and we're building on top of the same type of method. And the method is generally that if we want to teach our kitchen staff and we want to upskill them, it can't be all theoretical education. It has to be very hands-on, and they have to work in the kitchens along with culinary trainers, and sort of the theory of everything has to be worked into the program in that way. So that will be very much the way that we will be also working in the future. And we're also trying to figure out how to more and more tailor our education and training programs towards different types of kitchens and different types of skill levels within our group of kitchen employees. But that will be the way that we will be implementing this over the next 4 years until 2025, and we will see how far we will come. So I think I only have one slide left, and I'm done.
Wow, thank you so much, Anya. This was really exciting. Wow, this is since 2019, right?
The new food strategy is since 2019. Yeah. The organic conversion project has been going on since 2020 or 2001. So it's actually almost 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. So as I chatted to everyone, don't be shy. Please, either in the chat or if you want to raise hand, take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions for clarification or other questions, or even also just commenting on what you've heard from Anya and how that relates to your experience. I see a hand from Andrea. Andrea.
Yes, hello. Anya, thank you so much for this presentation, and Carina as well for all the introduction that you gave. I am super inspired by everything that you're doing, Anya, in Copenhagen. It sounds very nice. And as you mentioned, it's so important to show that you can actually have these diets and that it's actually a healthy option, that you are not doing it in the, just leaving behind the healthiness of people, the health of people. So I was just wondering if you could repeat what you mentioned, that there is a guide that you draw more inspiration from that gave you these nutritional statements and how much you could take. Could you repeat what is the name of this guide, please?
Yes, so that would be the Eat Lancet diet. So it's not, it's more inspiration, but I think the Eat Lancet diet is from my understanding, and I'm not very academic, but I think the exercise has been to say, so within the planetary boundaries, so what the resources that we have available on a planetary scale by 2050. So how should we split the resources that we have if everyone is to eat equally? So how can we make how should our diet be balanced in the sense that so to make sure that everyone has enough nutrition and also that the resources are not depleted on the planet. So that would be the Eat Lancet Commission. Our guidelines are based on a 25% reduction target, and for some of the institutions, actually, the guidelines would lead to more than a 25% reduction target. But for now, that's what our politicians have decided. So that's sort of the middle goal that we're going towards, and then we'll see if by 2025 they will ask us to reduce even further. And if there's potential, because obviously the potential is only there, the potential for reducing footprint is only there if our citizens are getting the right nutrition. So we can't reduce beyond sort of taking proper nutrition out of the mouths of citizens. So that would be the challenge.
Perfect, thank you.
For great question and great answer. And I see another question in the chat box and a comment from Sabina. Very interesting with these very specific guidelines and recipes, etc. What have been the largest challenges in relation to your reach out to your target groups? Has there been any resistance or what?
Yeah. We're only in the beginning process, so this training program has been launched only in October, and we've only started the new sort of climate training to build on top of the organic conversion training. Many of the principles are the same. So more seasonal vegetables, for instance, will obviously be in both categories. So I'll have to get back to you in a couple of years' time to say exactly what's worked. I can say from now, there's no. I mean, I think in Scandinavia, I think I can sort of generalize in that sense. We have a tradition, maybe especially among our elderly population, to eat a lot of meat-based dishes and to have sort of meals that are based around meat. So there's no question that the biggest challenge in changing the diets is within the elderly sector, because that's where sort of the tradition of meals is the strongest, and the sort of cuisine is more based around meat. Since we've had the organic conversion in Copenhagen, most of our kindergartens they've been serving meat once a week for many years, most of them. So for a lot of them, this will not be a challenge. Actually, we expect that actually some of our kindergartens will see that they might be on the lower side, that they actually need to have more focus on nutrition and to make sure that the food that they serve is sort of that there's enough energy for the children. So there might be sort of an adjustment both ways when they get these very specific guidelines to work from. So it's not just a climate sort of action. I think it will also be sort of a nutrition sort of safeguard in many cases. I think what the advisors are saying, who are talking to the kitchens, who are already out advising and sort of teaching, they're saying that when we had the organic conversion agenda, it was I've been teaching myself also for some years. That would usually start with a lot of discussions. People would come to the agenda with different starting points. So some people had a cousin who was a conventional farmer, and they really wanted to discuss all the merits of sustainable farming and who's doing the right thing and so on. So in some ways it could be controversial, but it was a political decision in our city. So it's sort of it's a democratic sort of prerogative to determine how we should spend our money. So so everyone has to comply with it. I think what they're saying now, the advisors who are meeting with the kitchens are saying that they feel like when they start this discussion with people, they're like, finally, everyone really, there's no need to sort of, we don't have like a huge group of climate deniers in our kitchen staff. Most of them are acutely aware of this challenge. Most of them also know that food plays a really big part of it. And so where they stand, those who are sort of maybe a little nervous about it, it's not about whether the challenge is worthy or whether they should do something. It's more about, how can I succeed? How can I, with all these new demands, how can I still cook food that my citizens and the people that I cook for, that they will still like? So it's more of a personal sort of, how can I succeed in this new type of diets? So I think and for me that's a change from the way that we've seen it before. So I think the world and the news and the IPCC report and so on have done all the preparations for us. So we basically have to come in and help them to figure out the steps towards succeeding, and also to change people's sort of expectations and palettes, and obviously it's still a challenge, but I think that the more specific the more specific we can become to sort of figuring out. We have many different strategies when it comes, especially to all the pulses and legumes that we have to put into our diet. So there's both the sort of the feature, how can we cook them in a really nice way and make them really appetizing, but also how can we hide them? And maybe that will be something for some of the elderly people. How much of the pate, of the chicken liver pate, can you exchange with lentils and still have it taste really good and have the citizens still feel like it's a really good product. So that's going to be, we can't just have one technique. We have to use all of them at the same time to figure out how to switch.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear this, like you come to the stage of really hands-on shared vision and more focus on a how, and very specific for different groups. And I wanted to bring up a really good question from Anya Hultberg here about then the specific group of children. You mentioned it a little bit, but have there been any challenges there in their shift to a planetary diet, and would you have any particular advice as to changing the behavior of the children?
I think I'd have to differentiate between our kindergartens and our schools, and we see that in the kindergartens where the meal is sort of there's one meal, everyone shares it, and it's the kitchen staff who plan it, and they're sort of the messenger who says, oh, today we're going to have these wonderful lentil burgers or whatever. That's quite sort of unproblematic. It's of course, obviously there will be local challenges. You'll have some grown-ups or some kids say, I don't like this or whatever, but it's not we don't see that as a sort of a structural challenge. So when we have a very clear host and where there's a clear social construct, it seems like the changes is easier. We have in our school food program, it functions in the way that you order the food online, so you can actually sit down with your child for the next 3 months and order the school food, and you can choose between 2 dishes every day. In that setting, we see that when we have meat dishes and lentil dishes or beans or pulses opposed to each other, the parents or the children or a combination, they tend to still very much choose the meat ones. If that is the question of the parents thinking that their children are much more sort of skeptical eaters, or if it's just a question of sort of when you're sitting by the computer, you're thinking, I just want my child to eat their food, so I'll take all the usual suspects. But there's something in that mechanism that we're having trouble with. So if anyone has really good advice on that, we would be really interested to be inspired, because that's one of the nuts we still have to crack. How to, when it's a selling type of situation, how to sort of encourage more sustainable behavior. Obviously, there will be some communication that we also need to do towards the parents, but that would be the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, Excellent and good question. And don't be shy if there's anyone on the call who would like to share any experience of successful approach here. And it's great to share the challenges and then keep sharing as we learn, because of course this is something that is evolving right now. But I find it so exciting with the leadership from cities like Copenhagen. Can I ask you, unless there are other, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So Anya, this is very much focused on the procured food in the city, but I know as part of your commitment as a good food city, you are also trying to influence the food situation outside of the public institutions. So would you like to mention anything on how you also try to encourage shifting towards more sustainable and healthy food beyond the schools and public institutions?
Yeah, that's not one of the areas where we can claim to be experts in any way, because I think that work is only just starting. We have a very loose framework and some ambitions that we want to be a sustainable city. We want to connect with the sort of the city or the countryside and production and so on. Many of the initiatives are still very loose. So we're doing some work where we partner with our local food bank, where they help us to create food communities in vulnerable neighborhoods. So they help find activists and help find local resources who want to be able to use some of the surplus food for having after school homework cafes or shared meals and so on. So we're trying to think in those terms. But there's definitely going to be more work on these in the coming years. Also, we have a big climate plan for Copenhagen coming up, so we hope to see food and especially the private consumption to be featured in that, and also to have some resources to work with that. But that's still being debated, so it's not one of the areas where we're really far along. Were you thinking of something specific, Carina? Maybe you know something that I don't.
And no, I wasn't thinking of anything specific. I know there's some work with the designing the city planning, like where the type of food that and more like cozy places to get the young people to choose the sustainable food.
Yeah, so that was one of the projects but that was more of that was an experiment with an architecture firm that were trying to figure out how we can change our landscapes, our foodscapes in the city to encourage more sustainable choices, and they actually had some really good insights. But it's not something that's been sort of expanded on a broad city level yet.
Yeah. Wow, I'm aware we are running over time. I'm so grateful for your contribution, Anya, to this call with some really hands-on action in the city of Copenhagen. Thank you.
I've added the link to the website with recipes in the chat, so you can have a look. It's in Danish, so I'm not sure how useful it is to.
Google Translate works everywhere.
Yeah.
So really, thank you all for your participation in this webinar. We look forward to meeting you in future webinars, and stay in touch. We have, of course, a place where you can connect on food. You can email myself, and on the panda.org city's web pages, you also find links and information about future webinars. So thank you all for today, and have a good food day. And thank you, and I see nice chats here as well. Looking forward to hearing you in the future and collaborating more on food and other important transformations where cities really are able to lead.